There was an early on urge to reach out outside of our marriage due to my own sexual dissatisfaction with our relationship.
Britton and Carolee Beckham were raised in the strict dogma of the Mormon church, and with infidelity threatening their marriage and family, found themselves at a cliff's edge. Through a deep commitment to heal, these two left everything they knew to find themselves. Over a period of 5 years, they rebooted their relationship and traveled the world seeking their truth with 4 kids in tow. They have emerged on the other side as embodied and an awakened couple with a powerful message to share about love, intimacy, healing, and the divine.
We had this moment of burning it all down. We were still married. We were still sleeping in the same bed. We energetically severed what we had connected to.
The more that one person tries to restrict another, the other person's ego will actually come out and try to overpower that.
How do you come to a place where is it even possible to have this third alternative that's actually not a compromise, that's a full fuck yes for both people?
A 2023 Harvard study found that out of everything it looked for as far as the root causes to help people have longer, healthier lives, the number one thing the study found that people should focus on is their relationships. So to help solve some of the relationship crisis that we have around the world, I have created this upcoming 3-day eternal honeymoon extravaganza. I am bringing together 15 speakers from around the world in the love, sex, intimacy, and relationship space to help you finally have better passion, have better sex, have better connection, communication, intimacy, and more. And this event is normally $397 and it is on sale right now for $1. So I hope you will prioritize your relationships and join me at this epic event. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode on the Libido Lounge. I'm your host, board certified sexologist, Dr. Diane, and I have a great pleasure for you guys today. We're going to talk about one partner being overly sexual, another partner being underly sexual. We're going to talk about infidelity, and we're going to talk about some of the most amazing ways to heal from infidelity. And one of the key things that people do not realize, and in many ways, I feel like one of the key mistakes that people make when they are trying to heal from infidelity, and tell you what that is. They're going to tell you what this is. We're going to go deep in our episode today. So to help us with this, welcome to the lounge, Britton and Carolee. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And just to kind of orient us before we go deep into the why, the healing, the how, all these things, could you guys give just kind of a brief history of your infidelity story? Just, kind of the high level synopsis so people understand where you are coming from.
Yeah, so I'll answer that since I was kind of the one that acted on that. Essentially, as we were married in 2009, and there was an early on urge to reach out outside of our marriage due to my own sexual dissatisfaction with our relationship. And that was small at first, but sort of became a pattern during the most difficult times in our marriage, which ended up being, unfortunately, during pregnancies, when she was completely out of libido and also just not feeling into her body at all. And so that became a pattern, and that pattern kind of hit the deepest low in 2017. And that was an actual sexual infidelity. And we sort of tried to bounce back from that through the process of our religion, which was the Mormon church. And going through that ended up being a big failure for our healing, but it did get us through the process with the church. But we were sort of disinterested a little bit in Mormonism after that because it didn't really give us what we were searching for. And so we eventually were introduced into, psilocybin mushrooms. We took that and it helped us to begin the journey of our healing. And we really dropped into it, which led us leaving the church and seeking, basically to heal ourselves from all of this and our trauma. And here we are 5 years later, 6 years now, and it's been a wild journey.
Yeah, thank you for that, and for being transparent, 'cause I think it helps so many people feel like they are related to. One of the things I know that in the sex therapy world, and for our listeners, remember I'm a sex doctor and sex educator, not a sex therapist, but in the sex therapy world, the common thing that's said is that when there's infidelity, one of the biggest mistakes people make is by trying to basically go back to their relationship as it was. And that's a huge mistake, because the relationship, in many ways, once there's this type of rift, it's not ever going to be the same. It has to be something new, and hopefully something immensely better. But there still needs to be this choice for rebuilding. And I know offline you talked a little bit about dissolving and rebooting, dissolving. And so that fits so much into the sex therapy language, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, we dissolve this old agreement and we reboot and make the new one. So tell us a little bit about like what that process was like for you, and how you began to, especially in like the rebooting phase, how did you really begin to like have those conversations to redefine your agreements? Like just tell us about that process.
Yeah, so I'll answer that. We like you said, in 2019 we had this journey that helped really kind of boot us into healing. And from that, we began doing various different healing modalities. We started various therapy, we did yoga trainings, trauma informed yoga, emotional re-education, sound healing. Like, it was just this sort of onslaught of all the different modalities, all the different ways in which we could hold ourselves, because we both were really in trauma from this catalyst in our relationship. I had significant PTSD. I also struggled with postpartum depression, and so like my baseline was one of great unease and unhappiness. But we really chose to continue to stay together as we went through these thresholds of our healing. And we got to this point in 2022, the beginning of 2022, where we had really given ourselves this re-education. We understood things from an emotionally intelligent context that we had never had before. And we were at this new threshold where we still weren't really happy in our partnership. And so, the medicine of mushrooms came back into our life at that moment too. And we had another ceremony. And around that time, Britton actually took our marriage certificate, because we were married in the Mormon LDS temple. The main one in Salt Lake City was where we were married in 2009. And so we had this beautiful, like, very nicely done up certificate that honored this. And he had taken out to the backyard and he burned it in our fire pit. And that bothered me at first. I was like, nah, he did that. But then, 2 months later, I actually also had my own kind of ritual experience of saying goodbye to our partnership. I had taken the dress that I had worn in the Mormon temple to marry him in. I tore it up to pieces. He had written me this poem and had gifted it to me on our wedding day. I took that as well. And I went up and held a fire myself with a few other women under a full moon. And I burned those pieces from our marriage too. So in the beginning of 2022, we had this moment of like burning it all down. We were still married. We were still sleeping in the same bed. We were still parenting our children, but we energetically severed what we had connected to and what we had created. And in the moment when I burned my wedding dress, I knew I had this clear reality, this clear awareness come to me that was like, you are attached to ideas that were given to you of what a successful relationship looks like. And because you're attached to this system, when you look out the world around you, you're noticing that all of these other people in the same culture that you're a part of, nobody's actually really happy in their partnership. But you all have this idea of what a perfect relationship is supposed to be like. So even though you don't know what a perfect relationship looks like for you, especially because you don't know what it looks like for you, burn it all down and allow yourself to start fresh and discover what that is for you. So that's what I did. It felt really dramatic, but I needed it to be. And I was like, goodbye, all of my hopes and dreams from 14-year-old Carolee, 7-year-old Carolee, 6-year-old Carolee, who really wanted this dream relationship. I didn't have it, but I was attached to what I told I was supposed to have. And I want to impress, I had done, in my opinion, everything right to have the relationship I was told I was supposed to. So we burned it, and then we let there be this pause of discovery of what that could be like. It took us a while. It wasn't until the fall of 2023 that we finally had been anchored enough into this new way of being, that I had my clear agreements, my clear knowing, and he was clear. And from there, it was just like this catapult of soaring at that point. There was a time when it was like this dark night of the soul for our relationship, of discovering what it could be.
So during this time, and I could talk to you guys all day because I feel like there's so many different directions we can go with everything you just said. But during this time, just to kind of focus on one thing, when you were in this kind of, like, we could say, dark night of the soul of like, what have I been taught around relationships and marriage? And, is this even what I want? And I did everything right and it's not happening. And what is real? And all of the, questions that could be coming up during this time. Were you guys, I want to know about like your interrelational space during that time. So, because it sounds like during this time, there was like a level of inner questioning, like, what do I want? What is relationship? How do I want this? What am I burning? What am I let going? What do I want to create? How much were you guys sharing about that process during that time? Was it sleeping in the same bed, but kind of living, coexisting, not really sharing this? Or what was that shared space like during that time?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, as soon as we left the church and we began our healing journey, we immediately started to commit to like massive amounts of honesty in our relationship, way more than we had been, just honesty in the sense of like just telling each other how we felt more, right? And so through that process from like basically late 2019 to when she was saying in 2022, we had continued this process of deepening our honesty, talking more about our feelings. We had moved through a lot of our healing, but what I had come to the conclusion of was my own sexual sovereignty earlier than she had. And so I knew that I could find a relationship, whether it was with her or someone else, where I could be married, but I could also be sexually active with other people, because that was enticing to me. And I had grown up in Mormonism, having some slight sexual connections with others. Well, not sex, but like sexual acts, hand jobs, blow jobs, those sorts of things. I did have some sex with premarital sex with some other women, but it was like not as much. So I just want to say all that was guilt ridden. All of it was guilt laden, and it was really hard for me to enjoy it. So I never did actually enjoy any of it. It was like stuff that I wanted to do and did do, but every time afterwards I was like in guilt and sadness about God's judgment on me. So knowing that now none of that there was no guilt associated with it, and I had let all that go, I was pushing on Carolee to like, hey, this is kind of what I'm looking for. This is the path I want to go. What are you willing to do here? And, I'll let her kind of speak a little bit about her feelings on that, but essentially she was very walled off still. She hadn't found even her own libido and like trust in herself within our relationship. So me pushing her in the direction of like exploring outside was traumatic for her, but it was where I was. And so like we ended up having some of those experiences and, inviting other people into the bedroom, just having, these experiences so that I could see what I enjoyed and not. And so that was taking place in 2022 during that. And so, yeah, we weren't walled off. Our relationship was actually good. We were co-parenting really well. And like we were in line, but we were still like working through lots of our healing.
And there were lots of triggers still, and also we were parenting 4 children who were under the age of 11, and so like during the day, there was so much in like just family life that was taking up our time. And we would then drop in from the hours of 9 until like 2 a.m. sometime, just processing, talking. And the other thing too, I just want to add to answer that question, as someone who was betrayed, I realized that he would withhold information from me, thinking that it was out of kindness because it would hurt too much for me to know. And it really got to the point where I was just like, let me be in charge of my own pain.
Mm-hmm.
The withholding of the story is more painful. The finding out and being deceived and feeling like and so the radical honesty, although at times it was hard and it super challenged me, pregnancy, delivering my babies, going through the birth portal, I had them all naturally. That was hard. But I realized how powerful I was when I was met with my own challenges. So it became this really clear thing for me that it was like, if we're going to even try to stay together, you're just going to tell me everything. And then we'll see and so we also set a precedent in this time frame of trying to discover what we were going to do. There was this moment where I was like, I'm actually not going to make a decision one way or the other if I'm going to leave this relationship or stay. I'm just going to hold, because sometimes we make these decisions out of our ego, out of our pain so quickly, instead of letting things kind of settle and discovering what our yeses are and what our nos are. And once I also discovered the possibility of sovereignty for myself, I realized truly I knew I wanted that. I didn't know if I wanted it necessarily with him, because the idea of me having sovereignty meant that I needed to give him his.
Just a quick interlude, because I want to address that it is so common that people are struggling to prioritize their relationships and their intimate life between jobs and kids and caring for elderly parents and so much more. Sometimes it can just feel like a last thing on the to-do list. Now, if you're struggling with that, or if you're struggling with having better sex or having good orgasms or lasting longer or erectile dysfunction or pelvic pain or something else in the sex, emotional, relationship, intimacy space, you are definitely going to want to take a moment right now so you remember to sign up for the Eternal Honeymoon Extravaganza. I have 15 speakers that I've specially curated and picked from around the world for a very complete and holistic look and teachings and actionable steps from everything under the sun, sex, and relationships. So take a quick minute, go click on that link and register to make sure you remember. And I look forward to seeing you there. Now let's get back to our episode.
And because of the pain and the betrayal, that was scary for me, which is super normal, to have that trauma and that fear. But that's kind of where we were at with that.
So I'm curious around this whole repair of this, right? In this defining the new agreements and the sexual sovereignty and defining the uniqueness of what this means for you guys. Because one of the things that people have heard me say on here a lot is we all get into oftentimes these relationships. Not everybody, but most people get into relationships with some construct from society of this, just like you guys, this is what the relationship is, versus actually taking a step back and being like, well, we're unique humans. We have a unique relationship. What do we actually want to be our unique agreements for how this relationship's going to work for the individuals as well as the co-space? So I'm curious if you can walk us through some of how, and it sounds like it was, some learning over time and it didn't take time, but some more specifics on how would you guys have these conversations? How did you really define the new agreements? And within answering this, I'm wondering if you can also incorporate we maybe tried this, and maybe there's advice you have for people around, hey, maybe this is not the direction that is perhaps the best direction to take with these conversations. Anything that can help our listeners to begin to have these conversations on redefining their agreements a little more effectively is part of where I'm going here.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot in there, and good stuff. Whew. So I would first say, when it comes to making agreements and this back and forth between two people that are trying to figure out what their relationship should look like, firstly, the more that one person tries to restrict another, the other person's ego will actually come out and try to overpower that. But when the energy is allotted freely, then the person is given full permission to themselves to find inward what it truly is that they want. And so there was this point where this thing, or I wanted to relate with other people, and I wanted her to be present. It was never me going out and finding other dates and that sort of thing. It was hey, come with me to this tantric thing or whatever when we were in Bali, or different things when we were in Utah. And It was always hard for her, but the more that she pushed back and said no, the more I wanted to, because I needed to experience my sovereignty. So that's something that, like, if two people are struggling to find an agreement, a lot of times they're not giving each other full freedom. And if they can, this can actually allow the person to find their truth. So for me, once she finally did, she's like, fine, Britton, tell me exactly what you want. So I went and wrote, I like had, I think it was several weeks of time to like contemplate this, to research polyamory, to research all the things that were they actually things that I wanted, and drop into my heart. And what my heart said was, I wanted to try these experiences and I wanted to have this, but that I was fully committed to her and to the evolution of our union. And at this point, we'd already seen it as a divine union. We'd already seen it as a very spiritual connection. And so that was like one of the big steps in that process of creating new agreements. And then from there, she had to like sit with it. There wasn't an urgency to rush it. That can also be a damaging thing for other people. Like if they're just trying to rush stuff, like you can get into all sorts of train wrecks there. But actually sometimes those train wrecks are important because it helps you to like reorient faster. So it just depends, do what you need to do. But yeah, like, so I handed out those agreements to her and she got to review them and sit with them for a bit. And then she was able to respond. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, look, yeah, Carly. Yeah. So, I mean, in this beginning stages, right? We're going back just a tiny bit to where like I took no initiative in our sexual life. I was deeply programmed from my own upbringing, my childhood traumas, childhood sexual trauma, and the family culture that I was in, to literally be a really good wife and a really good mother. But I had no context of how to be a lover. And I desired deeply to have this loving relationship. And I really thought that by being a wife and a mother, I would have all the things. But when it came down to it, right, my beloved, my husband was unfaithful again, and then again, and then again. And then I just couldn't feel happy in my own body, right? And so that's where I was. And I really, 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 really wanted to heal. I really wanted to be free from the trauma that had been pretty much a part of my whole life. What he did to betray me wasn't even the first time of betrayal, so to speak. Like I realized there was this common thread for myself in partnership and relationship that never quite felt settled and accepted and enough. So his actions just kind of highlighted that. Right. And so he asked, hey, let's experiment, let's play, let's open. And I guess the part that I would say that wasn't good for me was in those spaces, because I didn't actually have a yes there. It was more of a no. I was a chronic people pleaser. I was highly codependent. And so I'd step into these places where he lovingly was like, you just need to experience something. I mean, I'd only ever experienced him. Experience something and see you're okay. But I wasn't okay. I self-betrayed through those activities, through those actions, through putting myself in places that I wasn't ready, quote unquote, to be in. And that caused me to have to heal my own relationship with myself, holding my own safety, And so like, I would say that's a really important thing to know, that we walked through that threshold. He stayed with me and he held me through that. But then I had to get really clear, and it was hard. It was really hard for me to think about, to sit with his desires to have some kind of open relating experiences with others, because to me, in my own nervous system, it felt like a compromise. And then it also felt like it wasn't any different than the infidelity. I just actually would know about it beforehand. So those were two beliefs. And then also I felt like if I had this deep, deep core belief from my religious programming that if I were to have sex or be intimate in any way with anyone other than my married partnership, that I would lose my soul. Like I had this deep programming about the religious nature of sex and what that meant about me as a good person. So I had to kind of pull through all those threads apart. And we did this program, after we made some of these mistakes. They were really just clarity points, but like we did some of these activities, and I allowed myself to explore. I was open. I realized that my fear was actually blocking me from growth, that it's through our fears, instead of resisting it, that we gain greater clarity achieve what it is we're looking for. But then we did this program that was like a 12 subject kind of, it was called Life Book. And it was like, we looked at all the different categories of our life, our parenting relationship, our spiritual life, our physical life. And one of the categories was the love relationship. And in the early part of 2023, we were living in Bali. We had sold everything. We moved our family, like literally sold everything and moved with our 4 kids to Bali. And we were there and we were sitting with this program. Both of us sat down together, and I was on my laptop and he was on his, and we started typing out our ideal relationship parameters. What would I want? What would you? So we'd write it individually and then we share. And that was kind of actually a huge turning point for what we ended up being able to discover. Because once we both kind of sat with some specific prompts and got clear, we realized where we were was closer than where we had been, but it was still a little ways off from where we wanted to be. We were still in this vibration of compromise. In order for him to have what he wants, I lose. In order for me to have what I want, he loses. And how do you come to a place where is it even possible to have this third alternative that's actually not a compromise, that's a full fuck yes for both people? We didn't know how to find that. But sitting down with these ideals, these prompts of like what our ideal relationship, we did that beginning of 23, and it took until November of that year before all of the lessons that we needed, the embodiment, the journey. We were traveling the world at this time. It was this deep soul alchemy that we were doing, and finally landed in a way that we like arrived at a place where my agreements and his agreements didn't compromise the other. It was where we found our we. And that was even, I mean, yeah, there's so much more stories to tell about all of that, but that's kind of the high level.
Thank you. I mean, there's so much wisdom in what you say, right? I think this point around compromise is one of the examples of many things you guys have said that are like these teachings around relationships that people just accept around, like, well, this is what you're supposed to do. And you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things I talk about as well, around like nobody wins with compromise. Basically, we get two people not living their fullest expressions of themselves, not living in authenticity to who they are. And a lot you said too around this concept of, hey, when we are actually in these processes of learning, we're not going to necessarily get it right. We might try to compromise like you did with going to these play parties and these things that didn't feel good to you to please our partner. But I think one of the fundamental strategies is like starting to actually ask the right questions to first understand what one individually really wants first. Like, what is a good relationship, and how do you begin to understand that without the shame, the guilt, all those things, which is really a great lead into what we're going to talk about in part 2. So for everybody, remember in part 2, which you can access at the link in the show notes here. So in part 2, we're going to talk about the shadow side. We're going to talk about what comes up when we are renegotiating these agreements, where that stuff that we don't really look at, right? That stuff that we say, hey, we're going to tuck in the corner and it's bad or it's guilt-ridden or whatever. And we don't look at it. And we're actually going to say, well, it comes up. And sometimes it comes up in these ways that are like oftentimes not very pretty. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk with Britton and Carolee about some of their work in the play world, some of their work with things like BDSM and kink, and some of these alternative strategies that can actually help to deeply heal those parts of us. So again, all of that in part 2. So wrapping up today, I know we're going to put your website in the show notes. So the magicalstoryofus.com, we'll put that in the show notes for everybody. But I want to make sure you have a moment to talk and let everybody know about the work you do and how people can get support around this topic if people want more support.
Yeah. So first of all, one of the things I just want to say is great job on the whole, what does it look like for two humans to come together, and how can we make a relationship? Marriage has so many connotations and ideas and cultural traditions around it. And we should just start from the ground level of like, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. What does that look like for you? Like, let's just see what that looks like. But yeah, what Carolee and I do is we work with people that want to deepen their, well, first of all, generally speaking, we want to help people heal. So shadow work is the key, and in divine union or relationship like what a couple can have, there's an incredible amount of depth that can be achieved, and we want to guide people into being co-creators. So all of that is, on our website, The Magical Story of Us, where they can learn about some of the programs and coaching opportunities we have, and schedule a discovery call. So they can find that at that website.
Yeah, they can add their email into our system and be notified of, we have a book coming out later this year called Ritual Shadow Work, which is literally the synthesis of the most effective healing that we found and created our own little method for it. But yeah, you can access our social links and join our mailing list. And like Britton said, book a discovery call if some of the processes and the methods of the way we work with healing resonate.
Amazing. Well, we will have all of those links for you guys in the show notes on how to get a hold of Britton and Carolee. I hope you all will join us for part 2. And thank you all for being here for another episode on The Lounge. Ciao for now. Thank you for listening to the Libido Lounge. Please don't keep me a secret. Please share this with your friends. You can find me on YouTube, on Instagram, as well as how to work with me at mylibidodoc.com.